All right,
All right, so
just a second while I confirm the link opening. I know it already says that we're live, but just waiting for it to redirect to YouTube. Perfect. You can start, my friend. Thank you very much for waiting.
hello. Hello, everybody. Nice to be here, sharing a little bit of knowledge with you guys. Today we'll be talking about domain-driven design. I hope I don't deceive anyone. Was expecting data-driven design presentation. It's still DDD, but different Ds for a start. So I'll be talking a little bit about domain-driven design. Um, um, my name is Lucas Vieira. I currently work as software engineer at Utility Warehouse. It's an energy company uh, based here in United Kingdom. I have been working with them since 2022, May 2022, so almost 3 years with the company. In recent uh, in our recent past, basically from the start of 2024, we decided to go with new approach on how to model our applications, and decision was to go for domain-driven design at the time. And I'll be talking a little bit of how has been the experience and about the basics domain-driven design world. So yeah, before we start, do we have anybody here that has some experience with domain graphic design or something that you guys have heard about a little bit? Uh, nope. No, let's go then. Cool. So when we talk about domain-driven design, first thing that you my my think, or if you have heard about, is about the domain-driven design book from Eric Evans. This book was written in 2003. So it was a interesting time in software engineering world. So if you guys have been paying attention on that particular epoch from the mid 90s until the first 5 years of the 2000s, we had a very interesting development on concepts that we now apply and use every day. So it was a time for popularization of Java and object-oriented programming. We also have great popularization of design patterns. And also around that time, we did have the rise of domain-driven design, as I mentioned in 2003. And that this particular uh, strategy of building and modeling applications arised from a problem at the time. That was how to model and then make possible maintenance for big systems, big applications. Um, there were some other strategies that came up around that time, and domain-driven design is one of them. So we'll be talking about that one in particular. So for domain-driven design, we have three pillars. So we'll be talking in detail about each one of those. First one is ubiquitous language. And what this means is we aim, as part of domain-driven design strategy, to have a common language that is shared between us developers and what we call in this context domain experts, but you can see as your business experts, basically people who know a lot about the business and the problem that we are trying to solve. So, for example, in some context, if you work in a payments team in your company, you might want to refer for the people from finance department who deals with payments. These people probably knows better about how to do the payments, probably what are the issues that arise from that domain, how they solve it, and you can extract the knowledge and use your for to model your application, right? So that is the first pillar. But in order to do that, you need to have common language, common terminology between you, developers, and business people. This is aimed to facilitate uh, uh, the requirements, the communication between those people. So you can imagine that people from business, they don't know a lot, or at least I assume they don't know a lot about software development. And then it's very normal that when they describe some feature, they will describe in a way that is not exactly what you would think as clear uh, as a developer when you see that. In the same manner, if you want to communicate something to business people, you will use a different language in those people. Even though you might trying to do and to mean the same things, you use different ways to express that. And we have a section in BDD. We have as part of this process, we dedicate some time to achieve a common language, agree on this language, so we don't misinterpret any requirement or any communication between these two people. The next steps are strategic design, tactical design. So first one, the strategic design aims to understand the overall problem that we are dealing with. What are the entities that we should care about, and describe, then create a model of the domain that we want to sort out to solve. And the tactical design. In the tactical design, we actually get more near to hands-on process. Is where we actually model how our application should be working, and how basically how you structure um, your code. So tactical design is more code-oriented, technical-oriented. Strategic design is more modeling and knowledge gathering oriented. So let's start by talking about strategic design. So in strategic design, you can see this as working on problem space. And keep in mind, when I mean problem space, it's basically understanding the problem, agreeing with the business experts on a common language that you can use to communicate features and also receive feature requests from these people. Um, and in the last step, do the domain analysis, right? Uh, let's talk about the first one, value. So this is quite simple for people. I mean, from a domain perspective, is what this domain actually provides for the core business, right? What are you providing as part of this? What do you deliver as a value, right? So if we can take Giga Club as an example, what Giga Club delivers as value for you guys? Uh, you can feel free to participate if you want to raise your hand or do any question. Okay, so I assume that what Giga Club delivers to you is exposure to an international market, right?
Mm-hmm.
And strategies on how to take on those opportunities that arise from this exposure, right? So at least I can think of that. This is the
Uh,
core value that
yeah, we
um,
have the language basis, the
yeah,
strategic positioning on the market, and also technical language and challenges. So
perfect.
these are our main three pillars.
Yeah, so this is what you deliver for your customers, is
Mm-hmm.
what Gustavo has delivered to me years back, and Vinicius and Gustavo are delivering to you guys today. So this is the value. This sometimes it's not so clear to understand. Um, Even more when you work on a big organization that has 10 or more teams. So what ends up happening is that sometimes these teams are very specialized on a very specific part of the business. Um, and you can see data subdomains, but for orientating purposes, you can separate parts of the business as a big domains and start from there. Uh, if your company is quite big and have several teams, it's really, really hard to have common model, common domain model that encompasses the entire company. So you can do on bits, right? For example, Google, you can imagine that the team that handles Google's finance should be pretty big, right? They have a lot of challenges that small companies might not face. Uh, cool. Once that you have this sorted out, what is the value, which is important to understand, then we go to knowledge discovery or knowledge gathering. So this is a phase where you are supposed to talk with domain experts, understand the problem, understand what your application is supposed to do, and at some point we want. Some people use event storming. That is not a requirement, but for applying DDD, you can do this knowledge gathering in some other ways. Normally, people use event storming. I won't be talking about event storming here, but um, what people want to achieve with event storming basically is what actions, what events happens in that domain that are relevant for us, right? So, for example, for an e-commerce, the change in delivery address is very important event that your application should be aware of and act on. Um, as part of this, as part of knowledge discover, then you enter in the communication phase, and is on this stage that you start to agree with your domain experts on the common language that you guys want to use for that domain. Right? So ubiquitous language, what it means is you have technical experts that would be us, developers, engineers. You have domain experts, like finance context, probably accountants and directors of finance. But they understand that domain from uh, operational perspective, not from a technical perspective, operational perspective. What we want to achieve is to have a common language between those two uh, worlds, right? These two group of people. And once that you achieve that, you stick to that language. You do not try your best to not use different terms for the same things. Uh, so I remember an example that I have from a previous companies for customers that have left the company, was an e-commerce company. So you have different terms that in the end they mean the same thing. It means that the customer has left the company, is not a customer for us anymore. We do still have that data, but some people call churn customers, some people call lapsed customers, some people call um, inactive customers. So you have three terms to describe the same thing. At some point, you want to agree on a single term that means exactly that. And from that point on, you want to use that term whenever that subject appears. So whenever you want to refer to a customer that has left your company, you choose one of those three and stick with it from that point on. And last bit of strategic design, I would say, is one of the more important, together with the communication step, is the domain analysis, right? So when you talk about domain analysis, what you want to do is to identify within your problem what is what you do that is a advantage, that is really core for your application. What is your differential between your um, your competitors, right? So in order to when we do this domain analysis, we tend to classify domains into three bits, right? First one are core subdomains. That is something that your company or your domain offers that is pretty unique, right? So I would think about an example when Netflix, when it started, what they offered that was pretty unique was the ability to stream movies, and you could do from your home, right? So that was at the time was the core subdomain, and it still is a competitive advantage, right? Because although you have different streaming services, they do the same activity in different ways, but that is still a core subdomain. And then we have support subdomains and generic subdomains. Normally, those you can outsource or use off-the-shelf solutions. One example would be caching for your application. So some companies do, but normally we don't build a the cache database ourselves, right? We use something like Redis to use cache. The same is go for database, email sending, everything that is not very uncommon thing to be performed by your application can be classified as support subdomain or generic subdomain. Authentication, for example, it might be one of those. So you can build an application today, and instead of yourself handling authentication, you can use a third-party service like Google, integrate Google authentication, maybe Facebook and things like that. So authentication in this sense is not a core domain for the majority of the companies. Of course, if your company is one that provides that, and is your core domain. But, yeah, so when we get to domain analysis, we classify our domains: core, support, and generic. Um, I'll save the questions for the end. Then, right? Be,
Okay.
cool. So this was the problem space. As I mentioned, in the strategic design, what you want to do is to understand your domain, is to model um, your you can go and model your entities as well in this phase, but you want to agree for things that you want to do in this phase. Gather knowledge about your problem, agree on a common language with your domain experts, business experts, and then classify the domains that you found in domain analysis phase as core, support, and generic subdomains. Once that you have this bit done, then you can move to the next phase, that is the tactical design, right? And this is already more near or day-to-day activities, as is solution-oriented. So in this bit, you can think a little bit more how to solve the problem that you have at hand. Cool. So we have several terms here. I will go through each one. The first one is entity. So what is, there's a small issue, I slide, but okay, what is an entity? Entity in domain driver design is anything that should be identifiable, and that identification um, spans over domains, or even over context, and even through different domains, right? So if you have an example of a subscription service like Netflix or I don't know, Giga Club, for example, where I can put a if I can put a subscription service, we have can have a subscription domain, and then you have customers or users, and these users should be uniquely identifiable in your space. This is also true for another subdomains, right? So if you move to a payment, uh, if you move to a payment subdomain, and if you want to know which users have paid or not, you have to be able to identify payments to a very specific user. This identification could span across different domains, right? So this is an example. Already getting into bounded context. Hello.
You can keep going.
Yeah, cool. Cool. All right. So what we are seeing here are entities, right? So let's focus on customer entity is the example that was given. And let's imagine that we have a streaming service like live code and things like that. We have a context that is called subscription context. That contains an entity called customer, right? This customer should be unique. It should have a unique identification across all domains. Right? Then this subscription context, although is part of the same overall domain, in that particular context, customer means one thing, and different context will mean a different thing. Right? Why this happens? This happens because different contexts want different information, and you associate different behaviors for the same entity. So when a customer is subscribing to a service, we want a set of attributes that it might not be the same for a team dealing only with payments, right? So in this example, we have the marketing context, right? So although we have the same entities here, they means different things on different contexts, right? So um, this is an overall example. In marketing, you might have different ways to associate behavior to a given customer. You are more interested on how which your channels of communication are. In subscription context, you might be interested in different bits like payment methods and things like that. So this is what bounded context means. If you're a golden tip for you, if you are um, in doubt about if a context is how to classify context within a domain, you might think if any of the entities that domain they change the meaning between across different contexts. If they have a different meaning in different contexts, that is probably a case for having two bounded contexts between your domain model. In tactical design, we also have value objects. These are construction blocks for entities. So if you think of a customer, one customer is an entity itself because it should be identifiable and can mutate, as in the attributes for a customer can change. But it can be built up upon value objects. So value objects are bits that are not unique. They should not be uniquely identifiable across your context, and they should be immutable, right? So one example that is very common is address. So address can be seen as value object. So anything that you don't need to store and identify in a unique form, it's a value object of your domain. Next bit are the aggregates. So the way how aggregates work are put in a simple way. And sometimes you have interactions between entities for a given action on your application, on your domain, right? So let's imagine an e-commerce example. You have customer, you have order action, and each order is associated with a customer. And you have an aggregate, right? In which the order is an aggregate of entity, customer, and one or more entities, products. And you can link even entity called payment. Normally, the way how you identify those, and is also another tip for you, is you can look on entities that interact at some point in order to perform certain action in your application. So when you put an order on an e-commerce, you have a set of transactions of transformations that should happen. And this set of actions involve more than one entity. So in certain sense, you can see order as an aggregate for one or more entities that be performed as part of that. And what can be, when we say that it can be treated as single unity, is when you process data transformation for those, normally they should be treated together, right? So when you place an order, e-commerce, expect your order to be handled entirely linked to your account, your customer entity. Of course, this can fail due to some reasons, but ideally, you want those to be treated as a single bit. Either you have success in that operation or you fail, then return that. Also in tactical design, we have services, right? So the way how you can see services are how different layers or different bits of your application they provide functionality out of itself. So domain services in that point is it means that your domain itself encapsulates behavior, and it can be, for example, a calculation based on an order if you have a discount or something like that. That would be a domain service obligation. And then you have infrastructure services that allows you and allow your application to connect to databases, to connect to cache servers, to email services, whatever external dependency that you need, that should be handled by infrastructure service. And that in between you have application services. So application services, they can carry domain services and infrastructure services. But what's important is domain should never depend upon the other two. So infrastructure depends on domain, because if you're storing anything, If you have a customer entity and you want to persist that, you need an infrastructure layer for that. An application, of course. If your application receives requests from another application directly from the user, also needs to receive that, probably validate, and then pass that over to infrastructure service or possibly on the main service. But that should be done in a way that those applications, those layers, um, they can depend upon each other, except for the domain layer. It cannot depend on any other layer in this regard. So basically, the end goal for the majority of applications is to have something like this, right? So you have your application layer that depends upon infrastructure and on the domain model, and your infrastructure layer also depends on the domain model, because since your infrastructure layer works with representation of domain entities, it needs that as a dependence. In a similar way, your domain model layer should never depend on any of those other layers. It should be standing free from anything. And this is where normally you put your business logic. It should be entirely contained here. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with MVC architecture, but in MVC, you have a quite nice separation of responsibilities, right? You have your model, you're supposed to contain this business logic. You have your controller that is supposed, if I remember correctly, to validate this and pass that over to your model layer. And then you have your view layer that basically take care of the representation that your external world consumer or client will see. So your application layer, it can be anything. It can be a REST API. You can return data as XML, even directly a web page. But if you have that very well separated, you can have multiple application layers, multiple clients, depending on what they need. Cool. So, and we talk about domain-driven design. Now, when should we use it, right? So there's no there's no written rule about that. We normally try to look for some metrics. You can, in your context, you can look for some other, but at least these three, I believe, we can give you a good tip if you should apply or not. So first one is if your application normally from complex operation when dealing with data, and complex in this sense, it might be is a range here. So complex operations, what I mean by that is if between your input and your output, you perform a lot of things. If you need to trigger a certain alert, or you need to send communications, if you need to calculate discounts, if you need to calculate points for that customer, that are operations that happen between your input and your output. For example, the order example in an e-commerce website. Normally, when you place an order, it's not just store that in a database. You want to perform several operations as part of that. You want to check payment method. You want to check if you have the product in stock. If the customer has applied any discount, you might want to validate that. So it's a very complex set of operations, not just receiving the data, validating that, and then storing in a database. If your application has complex operations when dealing with inputs, that is a good indicator that might be applicable to have DDD. The second point is if your application that you're working on is is likely to become complex. Might not be complex now, but if you have an envision in the future that it can be more complex than it is today, then you might think of applying DDD. And another bit is if you are new to the problem that you're trying to solve. So if you're first time dealing with payments, for example, or something very specific in your company, you still can benefit of DDD. Right? You can use the knowledge gathering. You can use ubiquitous language and to understand your problem, model how you want to sort it out, how you want to solve that. Yeah, so I would say think about these three criteria wisely, and then you can decide if DDD is a good choice for you. I'll be honest, it's not always a good choice. If your application is not that much complex, it can be more of a burden than a helpful tool. So it's important to think about that if you are going to use DDD. And yeah, so basically that's it. Thank you very much.
Very nice.
Very nice.
We can open for questions now.
Sure.
We still have a bit of time.
I have a simple question. Like the architecture of my system, it will be on the infrastructure layer or in the domain model layer. For example, I want to apply microservices or a load balancer, something like that.
I would say it's more infrastructure layer, but the way how load balance normally work is you have that for your application. So before your application receives the request, that load balancer should have handled that for you. DDD actually do not dictate an architecture for you. So you can apply DDD with VC, you can apply with CQRS, you can apply in a microservices environment. So normally is how is applied, but it's not exclusive choice. You have to choose for an architecture. So if you have a web application, and I would say MVC fits well for majority of the web applications, you can apply you can still apply DDD with MVC. The only thing that you really need to take care of is that your domain models, your domain classes, representations, they do not depend on anything else within your code base. Then you have a good start.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Any more questions?
Anyone else, guys?
I forgot to check the chat. If there's someone.
No, nobody
We
sent
can also
anything.
just open discussion instead of necessarily questions.
Not sure how to do this. Zoom. Well, Vinicius, if you don't have any more questions, I'm passing over to you.
You can stop sharing your screen, Lucas. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, very nice.
So maybe we can ask questions to the audience to understand how they use it, how they implemented this in their work, and what was the experience.
Actually, yeah. Actually, I asked at the beginning if someone have applied that in their company, in their job. It would be nice to share some experience on that.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Mhm.
Can you pick a person?
Not sure.
Pick a random person.
Denard.
The best
Safety
choice.
net, safety net.
Chosen
Yeah,
wisely.
I'm not picking on you. Just I have to choose someone.
Not picking on you, just picking you. All right.
Yeah.
Actually, I was wondering if you could make briefly a comparison or saying this in another manner. What are the criteria that you could use in order to choose the DDD approach over, let's say, the clean architecture or the hexagonal architecture? I'm not sure if you are familiar with those other architectural approaches, but in which sense would you choose one over the other?
They are not exclusive, right? So DDD, as I mentioned, it do not dictate which architecture you should use. It's basically a strategy to understand your problem and how to model your basically your code. So the main goal is you have a code that is easier to maintain and easier to modify in the future. But in terms of architecture, there are people using DDD, hexagonal architecture. Of course, you need some adaptations, right? So when I should get back to this slide. In hexagonal architecture, for example, your application layer is what they call adapters. Yes, yeah, it should be adapters, right? And you have a client, external client, can be application or customer. Hits your application, your application layer will be then called adapter in that sense. And in clear architecture, it will be called in a different way. MVC will be called controller, right? Your controller will be your application layer for that sense. So yeah, you can still apply those strategies with DDD. It's not mutually exclusive.
So as long as you're keeping the principles, the main principles, you can do a mix or use approach as you saw fit.
Exactly. Yeah. So my work experience, we are experimenting now with CQRS using DDD. There's some other things that are going for hexagonal architecture approach. The only criteria is if you adhere to DDD principles, you should be fine.
Sure, I completely agree with that.
Vinicius, do you want to pick someone else? Or Denati, if you have any more questions, feel free to go on.
Come on, you're giving me this position, man.
Then I can pick someone else. I think he be appropriate to make this choice.
And if it's my turn, I'm gonna pick Mr. Anderson. Is he?
Oh, he left.
The house? He left?
He left, yes.
Nice timing.
There's Andre. Andre's right there. Andre is crazy to participate. I miss hearing his voice.
Go on, Andre. Make a very, very complicated question, please.
I have a lot here, but I will hear the question of Andre first.
Oh, come on, my friend. Go ahead, please.
Well, I'm glad to have some questions.
Have an interesting question, please go ahead.
Well, Lucas, I have been studying a lot about domain-driven design and like the Nats says, with architecture aspects, like a clean architecture. But one thing that I think it's different to understand in when you need to migrate some MVC projects to a clean architecture or something. It's about how we can separate these layers, you know, or how can separate the contexts. And for example, sometimes we need to use part of the bounded context in two layers, you know. So how can you do it when you working with the DD, for example?
Exactly, do you mean in two layers? You mean like in an infrastructure layer?
No, two bounded contexts. Sometimes we need to use uh, in two bounded contexts, different bounded contexts, and you need to use the same data, same part of the system, you know.
I
So I
see.
think this is a little difficult to understand if you came from MVC projects and using something like that to separate these things, and after can be used like a microservices. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, so if I got your question correctly, I will share my screen again, if that's okay.
Okay.
So I'm back on that slide with the bounded context. Sure. Yeah. So, for example, if I got it right, you have an entity that is in a context, and that might be an MVC application. Then you have another context that you have the same entity, but in a different representation, right? It would be something like that.
Yeah, I see this for you, but I think when you have the code, it's a little difficult to use. And so what do you do when you have this context here?
Yeah. So in my normal experience, what we normally are doing is migrating over legacy applications. So what we tend to do is to implement an anti-corruption layer. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but it's a very common approach when you have two different systems that need to represent the same entity. So the representation for an application might differ in another. So one strategy that we use, and it has been pretty good for us so far, is to implement an anti-corruption layer. So what we would have is the same entity getting to your application. But if your application has a different representation of that, you need an anti-corruption layer. So you can transform from your legacy application or your MVC application or any other application that was not modeled with DDD in mind, you can transform that old entity into a new representation that is coherent with your new approach. So you can implement an anti-corruption layer. Yeah.
So when you use an anti-corruption layer, you can share more data inside two contexts different, two different contexts or another. For example, it's the solution for the problem, or you think you can do it with another approach. For example, it's only solution.
Yeah. So your anti-corruption layer can receive the same representation or different representations, the same entity, also translate to different ones, right? So let's imagine that you have two services here, and you have legacy system that need to migrate data over, right?
Okay.
You might have an anti-corruption layer that translates into this model if needed, and into this model, right? You can differentiate. differentiate between those two. It's not necessary that you have a single representation as output for your anti-corruption layer.
Nice. Okay, I will see in my studies, in future studies about it. Thanks for your position.
No problem. Oh,
very nice.
Questions?
Anyone has any final questions? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. I do have one. Is if you guys use Discord, right? It's not Slack.
Yeah, we use Discord.
Okay. I will ask Gustavo to send me the server address. I believe I'm there, but
you're there, man.
Yeah, but I have not using Discord for a long time.
I believe you're here.
Yeah.
But maybe not. I don't know. It's been a while. Yeah, yeah. Okay. You can send me a message. I can share the link with you.
Okay.
All right, guys. So since nobody has any other
Hey,
questions,
Lucas, I just tagged you in the main chat, so you
perfect.
can see the notification.
Okay.
All right, let's wrap up.
Nice. Lucas, thank you very much for joining and giving this talk for us. It was very, very productive. And everyone else, guys, Lucas is on our community. You can reach him out either there or send him a message on LinkedIn. He's open to talk to anyone who has any questions or doubts. He has been one of the he was one of the first members of Giga, right? One of
Yes, he's like one of the
since
first
the beginning.
success cases.
Awesome.
Yeah, and one of the few that chose to actually move to a different country. You know,
he's a London guy.
He's a brave.
He's British.
Guy.
British.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
The accent though.
Let's wrap
right,
this
let's
one
take a picture.
with a picture. Yes.
Cool.
Let's go. All right, let's wait for Newton. All right, 3, 2, 1. All right, guys.
Perfect.
My friends, have a great Friday. See you all on Monday. And yeah, stay safe. Bye bye, guys.
Bye bye.
Bye.